Welcome to episode one of with Wake Up with Doc Scott, and this episode is episode one of a series that I'm doing on The Dream Giver by Bruce Wilkinson. So I'm going to read a chapter, and each episode in this podcast series will be a chapter with that includes reading it, but also includes my commentary. And so part of the landscape here, the reason why I've kind of enjoyed this book and wanted to do this particular series is because essentially there's so many people in the body of Christ right now who, after going through, you name it, 2 years of chaos and, lawlessness, you name it, having been through many fires and along the way as well. One of the things that's happened in all the disruption is everything that has been familiar to us has been pulled away. And although that is very disconcerting and discombobulating, to say the least, in the middle of this, there is a master reset. When I say master, I'm talking about the Holy Spirit. I did not say Siri. That was awesome. There is a master reset that is going on in the kingdom where everything is changing. So everything about the way that we think something is changing. The whole way that we do church, the way that we do life, all of it is changing. And so God is preparing us for this landscape that's very new. And in the context of that, many believers have gotten stuck. We're trying to figure out what our next step is. We know that we're not doing necessarily the thing we feel like we're created for. And we know that that's part of what is in our destiny picture, right? That is part of the dream. So as I've had conversations with people, I realize that part of the whole process in this era is to articulate the dream, to get in touch with the dream, to be able to put in language and identify the dream that's in your heart that God's given you. So in this series, we'll talk about a lot of those topics along the way. So he uses a parable, and that's what this is. So every chapter will be a part of this parable. And this is chapter 1, episode 1. Ordinary embraces his big dream. Not long ago, and not far away, a nobody named Ordinary lived in the land of the familiar. Every day was pretty much the same for Ordinary. In the mornings, he got up and went to his usual job. After work, he ate almost his same dinner he'd eaten the evening before. Then he sat in his recliner and watched the box that mesmerized most nobodies on most nights. Sometimes Best Friend would come over and join Ordinary in front of the box, and sometimes Ordinary went over to his parents and they watched the box together. For the most part, not much happened in Familiar that hadn't happened before. Ordinary thought he was content. He found the routines reliable, he blended in with the crowd, and mostly he wanted only what he had. Until the day Ordinary noticed a small nagging feeling that something big was missing from his life. Or maybe the feeling that he was missing from something big. He wasn't sure. The feeling grew, and even though nobodies in Familiar didn't generally expect the unexpected, Ordinary began to wish for it. Time passed, and then one morning, Ordinary woke up with these words echoing through his mind. What you're missing, you already have. Could it be? Ordinary looked and looked, and then he discovered that in a small corner of his heart lay a big dream. The big dream told him that he, a nobody, was made to be a somebody, and that he was destined to do great things. Jumping out of bed, Ordinary discovered something else, a long white feather resting on the sill of his window. Where did it come from? What did it mean? And with a jolt of excitement, Ordinary decided that he had been visited by the Dream Giver. Now, Ordinary had heard rumors of various nobodies in Familiar waking up to a big dream. but he'd never imagined that it would happen to him. He rushed to get dressed, his big dream beating brightly in his chest. He couldn't wait to get to his usual job and tell his best friend the news. But on his way to work, Ordinary realized he had a problem. His big dream was too big for a nobody like Ordinary. He would be too embarrassed to tell anyone. Even best friend would probably laugh. Still, Ordinary was too excited to keep the dream to himself. As soon as he saw best friend, he blurted out the news. The dream giver gave me a big dream. I was made to be a somebody and I was destined to achieve great things. Best friend looked surprised, but he didn't laugh. That's very big, he said. But if I were you, I wouldn't talk about this dream of yours too much. Nobody's around here might take you for a fool. Ordinary didn't want to look like a fool, so after that, he kept his big dream to himself. Day after day, Ordinary showed up at his usual job, but while he worked, he thought about his dream. He thought about how wonderful it would be to do what he loved to do instead of just dreaming about it. Ordinary, longing for his big dream, grew and grew until finally he realized that he wasn't going to be happy unless he could pursue it. Why didn't the dream giver make it possible? If the dream giver didn't, how could Ordinary ever leave familiar? He had payments, expenses, had regular duties. A lot of nobodies counted on him for a lot of things. Ordinary felt completely stuck. Time passed, but nothing changed. He began to hate his usual job. This isn't what I was made to do, he'd say to himself. I just know it. And after a while, he began to worry that maybe he hadn't received a big dream after all. Maybe he had just made it all up, and he grew sadder and sadder by the day. One evening after work, Ordinary went to his parents to watch the box. But their box was broken, so the house was very quiet. It was even more quiet because his mother was out shopping at Familiar Foods. In the quietness, Ordinary started to think about his dream again. He looked over at his father in his recliner, staring at the single page of Nobody's News. Maybe he could help. Father, said Ordinary, I'm growing sadder and sadder by the day. I don't like my usual job anymore. In fact, I think I hate it. Father looked up. That's terrible, he said. What happened? Before he could stop himself, Ordinary started talking about the dream giver, about his big dream. I was made to be a somebody, to achieve great things, he said. And then he told his father the name of his dream. And as he spoke, his voice trembled. He was sure that his father would laugh at him or call him a fool, but his father didn't. I'm not surprised to hear you say those things, he said. You're not? Said Ordinary. No, his father said. You've had that dream ever since you were little. Don't you remember? You used to build that same dream with sticks and muds in front of this very house. Sticks and mud. Then Ordinary did remember. He had always had his dream. It was what he'd always wanted to do and what he'd always thought he would be doing all along. His eyes filled with tears. Father, he said, I think I was born to do this. Ord and father sat quietly together. His father seemed remembering something too. After a while he asked, when you woke up to your big dream, son, did you happen to find a feather? Ordinary was shocked. How did you know? He asked. A long time ago I woke up to a big dream too, his father said, and it came with a long white feather. It was a wonderful dream. I kept the feather on my windowsill while I waited for a chance to pursue it. I waited and waited, but it never seemed possible. One day I noticed that the feather had actually turned to dust. Of all the sad words Ordinary had ever heard, these were the saddest. Before he left that night, his father hugged him. Don't make the same mistake I did, son, he said. You don't have to stay a nobody. You can be a dreamer. When Ordinary got home, he went straight to the window and picked up the long white feather. He turned it over carefully in his hands, and he thought about his father and the dream that he left behind. Then he had a surprising idea. Could it be that maybe the dream giver gave every nobody a dream, but only some embraced them, and even fewer pursued them? The more he thought about it, the more he thought it had to be true. One thing Ordinary did know for sure. He didn't want to repeat his father's mistake. He wouldn't waste another day waiting for his dream to seem possible. He would find a way to pursue it. Time passed, and Ordinary worked hard on his plan to begin his dream. He made hard choices. He made difficult changes. He even made big sacrifices. And finally, one morning, he was ready. Ordinary ran all the way to his usual job, his dream pounding in his chest, and as soon as he saw his best friend, Ordinary blurted out the news. That big dream I told you about, I've decided to pursue it. Best friend looked concerned. You know as well as I do that nobodies who pursue their dreams leave familiar, he said. They set off like fools into the unknown in search of a place. Yes, yes, I know, Ordinary broke in, and I can't wait to get started. But Ordinary, that journey is anything but sensible or safe. Why leave familiar? It's so comfortable here. And besides, you've always lived here. I've thought about that too, said Ordinary, but my big dream is too wonderful to miss. Best friend shook his head. So you're going to become a dreamer, he said. I am a dreamer, said Ordinary. Today I'm going to tell my boss that I'm leaving my usual job. Tomorrow I'll begin my journey. Hey, best friend, added Ordinary eagerly, you can have my recliner in my box. And with that, Ordinary walked away, humming a tune he'd never heard before. Right. The night before he left Familiar, Ordinary decided to use the long white feather to help him remember the truth. He pulled out a notebook and wrote "My Dream Journal" on the cover. Then he dipped the quill in permanent ink and wrote the first page. The dream giver gave me a big dream before I was even born. I just finally woke up to it. My dream is what I do best and what I love to do. How could I have missed it for so long? I had to sacrifice and make big changes to pursue my dream, but it'll be worth it. It makes me sad to think that so many nobodies are missing something so big. End of chapter 1. I love what Bruce does with the parable because I think he gives us language to talk about things that are pretty common in the stages that we go through in pursuing our dream, and the kind of obstacles and the things you'll see in the following chapters, kind of like the things that kind of interrupt the dream, crush it, the things that happen to the dreamer. It gets more interesting as it goes that way. And so, like I said, this particular chapter 1, it's the whole question of, what is the thing that I was made for? What is the dream? And how connected am I to it? I know for me personally, I know more about how I function and what I'm good at and how, what I do well than I do about what the actual dream is. And I think for so many people, particularly in the remnant today of the church, it's like we've been through so much and so many fires and so many storms that have been refining, and part of that path has been really messy, and the only thing we can really say, some of us at the end of where we're at right now as we cross over this threshold into a whole new era, is that we're still standing. The trek behind us looks pretty messy. We didn't do everything right and perfect, but that's not the qualification for the dream. And so as we come to this juncture, in the conversations that I've had with so many people, they've had a hard time because they feel stuck. Like, how do I begin to do something? And we've talked a lot about, find the thing that God is on and just start moving and let God speak to you along the way. And at the same time, the prayer is that you'll awaken to the dream that's been so muddled and covered over and broken down inside of you as you walk in radically unfamiliar territory and live in an unscripted way in an era where everything has been literally is being reset on every front. The world is changing as we know it, and it's never going to be the same. And so God is doing something in his people that have prepared us for the landscape, not because we've gotten everything right, but because through the many fires, something has emerged in our heart that makes saying yes easy, that puts flint in our forehead and steel in our backbone and resolve in us in a way that we never have ever had before. And we know there's no going back. We know that the only thing behind us is failure in religion, and we don't want either. And so we're in this place now where we're trying to um, grapple with this thing. Okay, what are we made for? What does this season of convergence look like for me? So that's what chapter one, that's the commentary, chapter one. Next episode, we'll continue with chapter two. All right.